update, proposal updates, and it becomes the contract baseline, right? That's cast in concrete, that's how you're moving forward. What we want to do is make sure that we provide flexibility to the government when they have to unilaterally make changes to our contract. So if somebody on high says, we now have to follow this regulation, okay, it's a perfect example. Why don't you chat about what your new topic is?
Some of you already know, but I was letting Marianne know that the end of March, the government awarded a contract to a new vendor to provide a unique identifier that everybody knows as the DUNS number. So Duns and Bradstreet is no longer going to have that contract. So at some point, you're going to have a new unique identifier for doing business with the government. And right now, they're calling it a SAMI. So we don't know how the changeover is going to happen, if people that are already active in SAM, if they will just automatically issue them a SAMI, or if there'll be a registration process. So that will be coming in the near future, but we don't really know a timeline on that yet. So just be aware of it, and I know the SAMI sounds ridiculous, and if you've seen that and had not heard about it, you probably think it was spam. So, but that's what it is for now.
Okay, so that would be an example, even though we don't know today how that's going to be enforced. The government could take your DUNS number that you have in SAM and just automatically convert it. In which case, they would send you a unilateral modification because this part of the contract has changed. They're just telling you this is what your new number is, and there's no cost to you, and all you. They're just telling you go forth and use this number from now on. So that would be an example of a unilateral modification. And just so you know, the DUNS number, if you remember getting the DUNS number, there was no charge to getting the DUNS number. So I'm assuming the SAMI number, there won't be any charge to that. Yeah. So that's an example for why the government needs flexibility to be automatically able to change things.
And one other thing I'll add, we've also been told if you already have a DUNS number, that number will still be attached to your government record. So if you've won any contracts in the past based on that DUNS number, you'll still be able to search by a DUNS number to find that past information. So it's still going to be attached to your record, but it's not going to be the number they use in SAM to award contracts when this changeover happens.
It also provides the contractor means of proposing changes. So there's going to be times when you go from version 5 of your product to version 6, and you're going to want to try to get the government to take that new version. That gives you the example of the ability to do that. It also gives the contracting officer the ability to add work. So let's talk about some of this. So let's say, for example, I have the government released an RFP, and they said, we want a contractor to come in and paint 3 rooms. Well, I put my proposal together, and lo and behold, I win this contract for 3 rooms. And then once I have the contract, the government said, you know, you guys did such a great job. They would never say this to me because I'm not a good painter. Let's pretend. You did such a great job. We want you to do 10 more rooms. Anybody see a problem with that? Other than the fact that I can't paint very well?
Unless the CO and you work it out and you change the contract, and you can't do it.
So partially right. The issue is that who would have gone after painting 3 rooms? What types of businesses? Small, right? And if you start talking about 10 rooms or 20 rooms or 30 rooms, who might now be interested in something like that? Large business, medium to large size businesses. So the government can't come out and say they want 3 rooms and add 10 to it, because that would be considered a very excessive scope change, because they went from 3 rooms to 10 rooms. Now let's say the original contract was 10 rooms, and they wanted to add another room to it. Do you think that's out of scope? No, it's just a little bit more of the same. The issue that the government is trying to prevent is from anybody protesting the way the award was conducted. And the argument would go something like this. Hey, if I would have known what you were really going to do was paint 20 rooms, I would have definitely bid on this. But when it was only 3 rooms, you know, I'm not going to come all the way out to Southwest Virginia to paint 3 rooms, but if you would have told me it was 20, I would have been in it. So that's what the government's trying to prevent. So they always look at changes to see whether they're within scope or if they're out of scope, and that's a good example of that. And then to provide the legal means by which you can process claims through the administrative disputes process. So changes give you the option to alter the contract as a result of something that's happened through the disputes phase. So the first kind of change we'll talk about is constructive change. This means that something has happened on the contract where the change has occurred, the change to be considered construed or inferred has the same effect as if the CO wrote an actual change order pursuant to the clause. So let's say, for example, the core comes in. I painted this room this off eggshell color. And the core comes in. And remember I told you, my relationship with the government is all with the core. And the core comes in and says, you know, Mariana, painting's fine. Yeah, I really wish it would have been like more of a aqua color, because I think that would have been more conducive to learning. And I want to be the good contractor, so by God, tonight I come in with my painting crew and we change this whole room into aqua. And contracting officer representative comes in tomorrow and says, what on earth did you do? Well, you mentioned that you thought it would be better aqua, and so we went ahead and made the change. And the government's like, oh my God, I just said that from a personal perspective. I wasn't giving you authority to change. So then the government would have to say, because what am I going to expect? Because payment for the new color paint and for the labor to paint it a second time. And so the government has to make a decision. Was this in the best interest of the government? And why did I rely on a core? Did the core ever give me the delegation of procurement letter to let me know that they can't make changes to the contract? How was I supposed to know that? Well, as a contractor, you're supposed to know that. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking constructive change. So when a contractor performs work beyond, that's what is required by the contract, and it was perceived that that work was ordered by the government or caused by government fault. You know, I could say, well, you know, this room kind of has a smoky smell to it. I'm going to go ahead, if I don't hear from you by next Friday, I'm going to go in and put that de-smoker paint on the walls to get that smell out of here. And I don't hear anything back from you. And I'm like, okay, well, it's Friday. Monday I come in and start painting. That's another example where, you know, the government could have, you know, I made the request, I didn't get any response back. And so the doctrine of constructive change is based on, they look at this constructive changes clause when any kind of disputes arise, because the disputes will go to the Board of Contract Appeals and courts, and they have to look at whether or not the government did in fact authorize the change through their actions. So here are some examples. If there are disagreements between the parties over the contract requirements, and so if the government's telling me to do something in a certain manner or rejects the way I'm doing it, it starts to border on personal services, that could be an example of constructive change. Defective specifications, when I put the lights in exactly the way they want me to put the lights in, but there's not enough light in here for us to actually work. That would be an example of constructive change. Acceleration, speeding up the work in an attempt to complete performance earlier than otherwise requested, could be a constructive change. Or government's failure to cooperate. They don't get back to me in time for reviews. So what we have to do in this situation is we have to say, okay, what was the baseline contract and what was the actual piece of the contract that changed? Because one of the sort of prevailing thoughts throughout this change discussion is we have good contractors and we have unscrupulous contractors. The unscrupulous contractors will say, you know what, I have this contract and you know what, I underbid this contract. It really should have been this much more. And now the government's coming along and there's a change. And the change affects this piece right here. An unscrupulous contractor will try to figure out the price of this change and add in all this up here to make themselves well and say that that's the cost of the change. And try to use this larger number as the starting point of negotiations with the government. So what the government has to pay attention to is to avert these types of unscrupulous contractors. And when we say the change only impacts this much, this is all we're talking about. You're gonna tell me what work is gonna be deleted from the contract, and you're gonna tell me what work is added to the contract, and you're gonna tell me how much cost is deleted from the contract, and you're gonna tell me how much cost is added to the contract, and you're gonna tell me how much schedule or time is taken away from by not having to do this, and how much schedule needs to be added to be able to do whatever they're replacing this with. You understand? So you can't make yourself whole if you underpriced it in the beginning through the changes clause. Constructive changes can be identified by either the government or the contractor. Typically occurs on cost reimbursable because the contractor would not typically do extra work on a firm fixed price contract unless they knew they were getting paid for it. So in a cost reimbursable contract, you're giving me X number of hours, and I think I'm supposed to answer the phone and document every single call I received, what the problem was, and how it was resolved. You only wanted me to answer the call and send it to the right people. Well, that's a disconnect, right? Because I thought what was required was to do this documentation. You didn't include that. So that would be an example on a cost reimbursable contract where we had a difference of opinion. If I'm in a firm fixed price, what am I going to try to do with the services I'm providing? Am I going to give you above and beyond, or am I going to keep it as tight as I can to the scope? Tight as I can to the scope. So that's why it tends to be more in the cost reimbursable phase. Once you get notification that there's been a change or a constructive change has occurred, the contracting officer has to determine whether the event in question was driven by technical direction, or in other words, did the government formally ask us to make this change, or was it done through this constructive change process? And then we go through a negotiations. Basically, the contractor puts together a proposal that describes this. You know, what work is being subtracted and added, what cost and schedule are being subtracted and added. Okay, any other questions about changes? Let's talk about options. Gives us the opportunity to talk about you when we come back. That's great, because we're tired of talking about you. Are you just pretending you don't know him anymore?
Yeah, yes, sir. One of us has to pay attention,
Okay, so options. Typically, the government will issue a contract for X number of years. And the way they'll word it is, this contract is a 3-year contract with 2 option years, or X number of option years. So what that means is, you are guaranteed the contract unless you screw up royally for those first 3 years of the contract. On September 30th, or just before September 30th, the government will send you a letter letting you know whether they have chosen to exercise the option for the first optional year of the contract. They only do it year by year. And then, so the answer could be yes, they are going to exercise the option, or they have the right to not exercise the option. And you really don't know that until just about September 4th, end of the government fiscal year. So it's a unilateral right in the contract, which the government may elect to buy additional supplies or services for a period, for the term of the 1-year term of the contract. CO is the only person that can exercise this option. So if the court tells you verbally that they're going to exercise it, then, you know, you can take it with a grain of salt because you have to wait till you get the actual letter. CORE may be asked to assist in processing the option by figuring out how many options there are. Now keep in mind, you are not the only contract the government has. So there may be other contracts that have been formed within the government that the agency who's buying the product or service from you has access to, and maybe those other prices are cheaper. So that's another reason why they may choose not to exercise. So they're going to look at available options. Do they really have a need for any more products and services? They're gonna look for the latest pricing information to see how much, you know, is your product price consistent with what they can get in the marketplace? And then they document the option in the profile. It's, option is processed successfully when it's exercised within the time frame. So, so just so you know the government's life cycle, starting October 1st. So October 1st and the month of October, they are cleaning up all the crazy that has happened at the end of the government fiscal year. So they're, you know, just trying to catch up, because September was absolutely a nightmare for every government agency. Anybody who's involved in procurement, September is a crazy time. And then November and December, you tend to have a lot of people out on vacation, so it tends to be a little bit slower, right? And then January, moderate workload. February. When you start getting into March, the government is now trying to figure out, OMB is giving them direction, to figure out, okay, are you going to spend all your money across all the programs that you have? So for every one of your programs, do you believe you're going to spend every penny that was allocated to that program? Why do you think the government cares whether you're going to spend every penny? Yeah, so if you're not going to spend it, they're going to de-obligate that money from the contract that you're on and move it to a contract or some other effort that they want to get done. Because the worst thing, I know Don's going to scowl at me.
I'm already thinking it, dear.
I know.
I'm way ahead of it.
Go ahead,
I'm a
don't spend it,
messenger.
and don't get it
That's
back.
it, exactly, yeah. It's so efficient, such a marvelous way to conduct business in the real world. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It'd be nice if we could do that.
I mean, I was way ahead of you. I thought this is where it's coming to. I knew
So for the
that.
rest of you,
Just because they're not saying it doesn't mean they're not thinking it.
so they have to spend it or they lose it for the upcoming year. And it is going to be sensitive. And that time frame is moving, like it used to be that they didn't really start thinking about this stuff till like July, August time frame. But now, like I was at a Navy, one of the Navy bases teaching a class and they invited me to a picnic they were having outside. And like I was sitting there with the Admiral and his chief budget guy and he's like, you know, start shaking bushes now. And this is like beginning of March, you know, so that process keeps moving back earlier and earlier. So that's something else that will drive this whole option notion. And then they want to make sure that the option represents the most advantageous means that the government can use to fulfill this obligation. So how do they evaluate them? They read and review the contract to thoroughly understand the requirements. So basically, what all am I getting under this contract? What are all the individual piece parts and what are the prices? And then, is there any are there any other contract vehicles that I can use that would give me better prices? Is there funding for the option available? Is the requirement covered by the option of fulfilling an existing government need? Does the option, so basically what the option does is it extends all the existing products and services for another year. Do we still need those products and services? Do we need different types of products and services? If we need different, then we probably don't exercise the option year. Instead, we recompete, or we use another contract vehicle to get the work done. It can only be exercised if it's prior to the date specified in the contract for exercising it, so it's usually September 30th, and if it's in accordance with the terms and conditions of the contract. So, options are good things. They have to, again, determine the need for additional resources. They have to justify whether they need to exercise it, what's the advantage of exercising, what's the technical impact, and then whether there's funding available. And again, they're trying to weigh that with all the other budgetary issues the agency has. They also go out and look at market information for the latest pricing information to see if the option year pricing, because remember, if it's a 5-year contract, before the first year, when you were preparing your proposal, you were guessing how much your product was going to cost for year 1. You knew how much your product was going to cost for year 1, because those are the prices you're using today. But you were guessing what it was going to cost for year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. And, you know, you may have decided to guess on the high side, which means your option prices for years 4 and 5 are much higher than what the market is right now.